My father has successfully expanded and increased profits in the company founded by my grandfather. Recently, he assured me that he would transfer a luxurious villa, a grand mansion, to me. However, I've now realized that what rightfully belongs to you should also belong to me as your husband. This mansion is now mine, and I intend to hire you as a housemaid. If you're not on board with that, well, divorce is always an option. As it turns out, despite the mansion supposedly being registered in my name, my husband secretly had his own name inscribed on the legal documents. Does he genuinely think this is acceptable? Does he even grasp the potential consequences of such an act? My name is Aaron, and while I don't mean to brag, I was born into a wealthy family. My father, the CEO of multiple companies, inherited the business from my grandfather, who initially started out with a small shop repairing and selling TVs and music systems. Over the years, the business thrived, expanding into various sectors, including IT. My father's foresight in selling computers and accessories before they became widely popular turned out to be highly profitable. In addition to the tech industry, he also ventured into real estate, collaborating with local businesses and playing an active role in community development. My mother served as the vice president of the company, and after earning a degree in IT, I joined the family business as well. Despite our affluence, we didn't indulge in excessive luxury like you see in TV dramas. My father believed in instilling strong values, rejecting the notion that spoiling a child leads to responsible growth. While our family home was large and we did have a housemaid, I was still expected to participate in household chores. Dining at fancy restaurants was rare, and international trips were limited to once a year, with most vacations being local getaways. My school life was quite ordinary, and from my unassuming nature, it was difficult for anyone to guess that I came from wealth. Like any other girl, I dated guys my age, and among them was Michael, who later became my husband. At the time, we were colleagues at the same workplace. I worked as a sales representative and office manager at an IT-related store, and Michael was also a sales rep there. I deliberately chose not to reveal that my father was the CEO, which made it easier for Michael to approach me without hesitation. I noticed he was straightforward and didn't hold back. Though I never sought extravagant outings, I always suggested places that fit within Michael's budget. At restaurants, he would order generously, reasoning that any leftovers would still be eaten, making it a cost-effective way to enjoy a hearty meal. Some might have considered him frugal, but I found it rather endearing. Unbeknownst to him, I earned several times more than he did. I was content with my salary, as it fairly compensated me for my responsibilities. Over time, I unknowingly became more accommodating. Michael always looked for budget-friendly ways to enjoy food, and I responded by making thoughtful gestures. During our dates, I would buy extra food or small gifts, knowing he would appreciate them. When shopping for clothes, I'd pick up extra socks for him, and if I bought a new bedspread, I'd include pajamas and a pillow for him as well. Making him happy brought me joy. Even when visiting his home, I would cook for him and clean up without hesitation. Then, one day, out of the blue, Michael proposed to me, saying he couldn't imagine anyone better for him. At that moment, I hesitated. After all, my father was the CEO of a major company, and Michael, though working in the same field, was unaware of my family status. I feared that if he found out, it might change how he saw me or our relationship. To clear any doubts, I decided to take Michael to my parents' home for the first time. I wanted to introduce him to my family and reveal the truth about my background. If he accepted everything, I would happily marry him. As the visit approached, Michael appeared visibly nervous. However, my father, though strict at times, was generally calm and welcoming. When I introduced Michael as the man I was considering marrying, my father greeted him with a warm smile, which seemed to ease Michael's anxiety. Michael was taken aback when he discovered that my father was the CEO, yet he handled the situation surprisingly well. My father's composed demeanor helped smooth things over. As we left, Michael marveled at the sheer size and elegance of our home, expressing his gratitude for my father's kindness. He even mentioned that he could see himself getting along well with my family. When I casually mentioned that my father owned several other properties, including a vacation home, Michael's astonishment grew. Yet, despite this revelation, he remained determined to marry me, the daughter of a powerful businessman. And I agreed. We eventually tied the knot, but one thing bothered me. At the moment I accepted his proposal, I noticed a brief, mischievous grin flash across Michael's face. It was so fleeting that I brushed it off, thinking it was just his quirky way of smiling. But perhaps, had I paid closer attention, I could have foreseen the disaster ahead. After our marriage, we moved into a modest apartment, not overly luxurious, but comfortable. Michael seemed to understand my father's stature, yet I never openly disclosed my income. I continued to live modestly. Over time, however, Michael's behavior began to shift. As I juggled work and household responsibilities, he started demanding more. One evening, as I prepared dinner, he casually asked, "What's for dinner tonight?" Smiling, I told him I had made his favorite curry rice. But to my surprise, his expression turned sour. Letting out a sigh, he leaned back on the sofa and said, "You know, we should have something fancy once in a while. Like a prime beef steak." I was caught off guard. Michael had never complained about my cooking before. I pointed out that prime beef was quite expensive, but he clicked his tongue in annoyance. "With how much your father makes, having prime beef occasionally shouldn't be a big deal," he remarked. Reluctantly, I agreed to get it for the next day. Michael smirked and remarked that from now on, indulging in such luxuries should become a normal part of our lives. While my salary could certainly accommodate these expenses, my upbringing had ingrained in me a reluctance to splurge unnecessarily. However, to avoid conflicts early in our marriage, I chose to give in and prepared the prime beef steak as he wished. Unfortunately, Michael's appetite for extravagance didn't stop there. He began frequently requesting high-end ingredients for meals and insisted on dining at upscale restaurants whenever we went out. His desires extended beyond food. He started talking about getting a TV larger than 60 inches and even suggested investing in a massage chair, claiming it would help him relax after work. As these demands became more frequent, I found myself growing increasingly uneasy. I couldn't understand the sudden need for such excessive purchases and eventually confronted him, questioning whether he thought we had an endless supply of money. I pointed out that leading such an extravagant lifestyle was unnecessary. Michael's reaction was one of irritation. He clicked his tongue in annoyance and insisted that, as my husband, he contributed to the household expenses and, therefore, had a say in how we lived. His words left me puzzled. While I appreciated his contributions, they were not substantial enough to warrant such an opulent lifestyle. In reality, I was the one contributing more financially, though I had never disclosed this to him. Yet, he spoke as if he were the primary provider, making demands without hesitation. His change in behavior left me unsettled. This was not the Michael I had known, and I struggled to understand what had prompted this shift. Conflicted, I decided to temporarily diffuse the situation by telling him I would think about it. Little did I know that in just a few days, the real reason behind his newfound confidence would become painfully clear. One afternoon, my father called me to his office at the IT shop where I worked, saying he had something important to discuss. Michael was busy at the time, so I went alone. When I arrived, my father initiated a serious conversation. He confided in me that he was unsure how much longer he would continue as CEO and that I should consider preparing to take over in the future. He then brought up the vacation home, mentioning his plan to transfer it to me. This vacation home, which I had briefly mentioned to Michael before, was more of a grand lodge than a simple retreat. Located just a 30-minute drive away, it had once been a venue for my father's gatherings with local business owners under the guise of meetings. Although those gatherings had ceased, the house remained well-maintained by a caretaker and was always ready for use. My father assured me that I could use it however I pleased. His offer left me uncertain. The property was over 6,000 square feet, surrounded by nature, featuring a luxurious garden, and was essentially a mansion. I lacked the social connections to host lavish parties, so I considered keeping it as an investment. I told my father that I needed time to think it over, and he reassured me that there was no rush. Before leaving, he placed a contract on my desk, instructing me to review it at my own pace. That evening, after returning home, I leaned toward accepting the mansion, deciding to finalize my thoughts the following day. However, I had no idea that the situation would take a drastic turn before I even had the chance. The next morning, upon arriving at work, I immediately noticed Michael's absence. He usually arrived before me, so this was unusual. Feeling a sense of unease, I walked into the office, only to find him standing there. Confused, I asked, "What are you doing here?" Instead of answering directly, he smirked and held up a document in front of me. "I overheard the conversation about the mansion yesterday. Sounds like an amazing deal, right?" I froze. The document he was flaunting was the very same contract my father had handed me just the day before. But what truly shocked me was the fact that Michael had inscribed his own name on it. Staring at him in disbelief, I demanded, "What on earth are you doing?" Without a trace of remorse, he casually shrugged and replied, "Why not? Your dad said he's giving away an amazing mansion, didn't he? If you weren't going to decide, I figured I'd take care of it myself." I was speechless. This wasn't just some minor misstep. He had taken something meant for me and claimed it as his own. I desperately tried to make him understand, pleading with him, "That house is worth $4 million. My father intended to give it to me, not you." But Michael merely laughed, completely unfazed. $4 million, huh? That's impressive. But think about it, I'm your husband. That means what's yours is also mine. Your dad likes me, so he probably won't mind. So from today, this villa is my house." Then, with an arrogant smirk, he added, "If you're going to live in a mansion, you might as well make yourself useful. How about I hire you as a maid? If you don't like it, well, a divorce is always an option." It was at that moment that everything became clear. Every word, every action of his leading up to this point suddenly made perfect sense. Michael had no qualms about taking from others, even if it meant practically stealing without remorse. During our dating days, I had showered him with gifts, yet he had never reciprocated. Perhaps my generosity had spoiled him, leading him to believe that whatever was mine was automatically his. My father's kindness to Michael likely made him feel that he could easily manipulate him, and worse, that I was even more gullible. A plan began to form in my mind, and I decided to confront him. With a steady voice, I declared, "Fine then, this mansion is yours. But I will not be your maid. Let's get a divorce. Take care." After that, I returned to work and, during my lunch break, contacted a divorce lawyer to initiate the process. Michael, seemingly unfazed, responded with bravado, claiming he was fine with it and even canceling the lease on his current place. Little did he know that a harsh reality was about to hit him, one he hadn't even begun to comprehend. That evening, I went to my parents' house and shared everything with my father. From that point forward, everything unfolded according to my plan. A few weeks later, Michael called me in a panic. He had received an enormous bill, his voice shaking with disbelief. While his shock was understandable, it was only fair. He had claimed ownership of a $4 million property, and now he was being hit with the fixed property tax. I casually informed him that such taxes were an expected part of owning property. Michael, however, seemed utterly clueless. He had no understanding that property taxes were a routine obligation for homeowners. Under normal circumstances, my father would have covered the tax had he retained ownership of the house. But after hearing the full story, my usually calm father was furious. Despite my warnings about my father's strict nature, Michael had assumed he could get away with his deception. My father's response was unwavering. If he can afford it, he can keep it. He allowed the property transfer to Michael to stand, fully aware that Michael could never afford the expenses. A part of me wanted Michael to learn this harsh lesson. I knew he wouldn't be able to sustain himself for long. Frustrated with his persistent pleas for help, I delivered the final blow. The annual property tax alone amounts to $60,000. It was then that everything clicked for Michael. His entire life, he had tried to take advantage of those around him, likely driving away friends and leaving himself without anyone willing to guide him toward common sense. Perhaps I had been unreasonable in the past, but now, my perception of him had completely changed. I had no sympathy left. Without another word, I hung up the phone. Michael, unable to afford the property, was ultimately evicted. My father, as planned, reverted the deed back to my name and paid the necessary gift tax himself. Meanwhile, Michael faced severe consequences. He was fired from his job and charged with unlawfully altering a property deed. His parents reprimanded him, and his acquaintances shunned him. Now jobless and friendless, he barely scraped by, living in a rundown apartment and taking on whatever small jobs he could find. His own parents even considered disowning him. As for me, I gradually prepared to take over my father's company. He once told me, "Success in business doesn't come from looking for shortcuts." Reflecting on how close I had come to spending my life with Michael, I deeply understood the truth in those words. Inspired by my father's wisdom and leadership, I pushed forward every day, fully dedicated to running the business and building a future that is truly mine.